Good evening. We are awaiting the President of the United States. He is going to come out and make a statement about the still undecided election. I am now this senior politics producer, Alan Piper. I'm supported today by Brandon Caruso, Sarah Cotis, Ian McKenna, Matt McDonough, Nico Pitney, Versha Shamra, Alex Rabinowitz, and Shelby Vacklin. And we are all in this nation in a tense state, as we do not yet know who will be taking the oath of office on January 20th. President Trump has been falsely claiming that he won the election and that Democrats are attempting to steal it via widespread voter fraud. To try to answer some of your questions. If you are watching on Facebook, you can leave them in the comments. If you are watching on Twitter, you can tweet them at me at apiper13. But just to bring you up to speed about where we are, and I'm told that there is perhaps a signal problem, so I'm going to look into investigating that. All right, I'm told that the signal has been corrected. We are all working from home, so there are occasionally issues with the stream. I suspect that they are largely related to my internet. Thank you very much, Spectrum Cable. Now, we'd like to try to use this time to take your questions. This is an uncertain time for all of us. If you leave questions in the comments on Facebook, we will attempt to answer them. And if you tweet them at me at apiper13, we will try to answer them. But a couple of things that you should know going in. We made some videos explaining what to expect from election night, and what has happened is largely what we predicted. It is typical for Republican candidates to take an early lead. There are a few reasons for this. Typically, two of the first states to be called, based on the times that the polls close in those states, are West Virginia and Indiana. Those are typically red states, so on the beginning of a presidential election night, the first score added to the board usually does go to the Republican. Something else to bear in mind, though, is that in each state, Republicans tend to take an early lead. This is due to a few causes. One of them is that votes are counted in precincts, and Republicans tend to live in more sparsely populated precincts. Democrats tend to live in more densely populated precincts. So an example that we cited recently has to do with the key swing state of Florida, where if you compare Liberty County, which has about 2,000 residents, they have only 2,000 votes to count, whereas Broward County has about 2 million votes to count. So obviously, the smaller precincts are going to get counted first. This is one of the areas that President Trump has suggested is suspicious, that it looks like he's ahead to begin with, and then Democrats start catching up. But that's not suspicious. That's just votes getting counted. An additional factor this year is the unprecedented number of mail-in votes. Over 100 million people voted early in this election, and most of those votes were cast via the mail. Mail votes take longer to count. It's just the nature of the thing. First of all, you have to physically open the envelope. If you've ever gone on vacation and come back home to a stack of mail, you might know that opening up dozens of envelopes takes a long time. So just imagine how long it takes to open up 100 million envelopes. And in many states, actually most states, the mail ballots aren't allowed to be counted before Election Day, even if they've been sent long before. And this is something that in the Republican legislatures in states like Pennsylvania have actively worked at. One could speculate as to the reasons why. Some critics have speculated that it is specifically to make it take longer for mail-in votes to be counted because they feel that it gives them a political advantage. In a normal year, and this is not one, it is unclear if one party votes by mail more than another. But in this year, when the President of the United States has actively politicized mail-in voting, it is not surprising that the mail-in votes are predominantly Democratic votes. In fact, it was estimated by the data firm Hawkfish that nearly 70% of Biden voters would be voting by mail, whereas the majority of Trump voters would be voting in person on Election Day. The in-person on Election Day votes get counted first in most states. So it is not surprising. And here's the President of the United States, so we're going to hear what he has to say, and we will attempt to fact-check him in real time.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to provide the American people with an update on our efforts to protect the integrity of our very important 2020 election. If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count the illegal votes, they can try to steal.
All right, well, the president is already lying. He is already claiming that he easily wins with the legal votes. All the votes that have been counted are legal votes by U.S. citizens. There has been no evidence whatsoever that illegal votes have been cast or are swaying this election.
We won these and many other victories despite historic election interference from big media, big money, and big tech. As everybody saw, we won by historic numbers. And the pollsters got it knowingly wrong. They got it.
So it just is not true to say that he's won by historic numbers because A, no one has won yet. B, he is substantially behind both in the electoral vote and in the popular vote.
Instead, there was a big red wave, and it's been properly acknowledged actually by the media. They were, I think, very impressed, but that was after the fact. That doesn't do us any good. We kept the Senate despite having twice as many seats to defend as Democrats.
It's actually too early to say if the Senate has been kept. It has been kept for the time being, but that is because two races in Georgia are going to a runoff, and they will be decided in January, and it is unclear which party will take control of the Senate then.
Was overall against us. At the national level, our opponents' major donors were Wall Street bankers and special interests. Our major donors were police officers, farmers, everyday citizens. Yet for the first time ever, we lost 0 races in the House. I was talking to Kevin McCarthy today. He said he couldn't believe it. 0 races. Very unusual thing, 0. And actually won many new seats with, I think, many more on the way. This was also the year of...
The president, it is simply not true to say that Republicans won all the House races. It's not true. Democrats have retained control of the House. He may be saying that sitting Republicans didn't lose their seats, and it's still too early to say with the votes being counted whether that's true. I do want to highlight also he said that Democrats' big donors were some sort of big money interest. Joe Biden's average donation size was $44.
The big media, the big tech, it seems, and Republicans have become the party of the American worker, and that's what's happened. And we're also, I believe, the party of inclusion. As everyone now recognizes, media polling was election interference in the truest sense of that word.
It is strange and striking to hear the president say that the Republican Party has become the party of inclusion. Just starting with the fact that he ran for office specifically on a literal exclusion policy of saying that he would ban all Muslims from coming to the United States. This party has been embracing both dog whistle and, in many instances, overt white nationalism. So it is a striking claim.
Which was wrong on every occasion that I know of. Had Joe Biden up by 5 points in Florida, and they were off by 8.4.
House, at least 2 Republicans lost their seats, and there are still some uncalled races.
They had him up 4 points in Ohio, and they were up by 12.2 points. And they also...
Now, people who have been watching President Trump's events since he began running for president in 2015 will note that reciting poll numbers is a frequent refrain. Poll numbers, however, are by themselves fairly meaningless. The only polls that actually matter are the ballot box polls where you show up on election day. The
voting apparatus of those states are run in all cases by Democrats. We were winning in all the key locations by a lot, actually. And then our numbers started miraculously getting whittled away.
Now, if you didn't tune in earlier, I mentioned part of why this is. It is actually not surprising that a Republican takes a lead to begin with, and then that lead is eroded as more votes are counted, because typically the smaller precincts, which tend to be more Republican, are counted first because they are smaller. A small district, a county that 2,000 people live in, is counted more quickly than a county that 2 million people live in.
Litigation generally because of how unfair this process was, and I predicted that. I've been talking about mail-in voting for a long time. It's really destroyed our system. It's a corrupt system, and it makes people corrupt even if they aren't by nature.
So it is true that the president has been talking about mail-in voting for a long time, but his statements have been false. Mail-in voting is not a corrupt system. 5 states vote by mail all the time, even in a regular year. Oregon was one of the first states, and in the 20 years since it started mail-in universal voting, more than 100 million ballots have been mailed in, and of those there have only been about a dozen proven cases of fraud. Voting fraud is so rare as to be statistically non-existent, and that is true both for in-person voting and voting by mail.
Pennsylvania, I won Pennsylvania by a lot, and that gets whittled down to, I think they said now we're up by 90,000 votes, and they'll keep coming and coming and coming. They find them all over, and they don't want us to have any observers. Although we won a court case, the judge said you have to have observers.
So several things that are wrong here. He says they're finding these votes. They're coming from all over. They're coming from U.S. citizens who are voting. This is not a surprise. This is not the system not working. This is how the system works. It is also worth noting that traditionally, one of the groups of people whose votes always come in last and by mail are active duty service members who are deployed overseas. And when the president says that no votes received after Election Day should be counted, he is specifically saying that our active duty service members should not have their votes counted. It's also not true to say that there are no observers. There are typically in polling places observers, specific officials from both parties who are there to observe and look for irregularities.
The election apparatus in Georgia is run by Democrats. We also had margins of 300,000 in Michigan. We're way up in Michigan, won the state. And in Wisconsin,
the president keeps claiming that he won states he did not. He did not win Michigan. He did not win Pennsylvania. Simply having started out ahead does not mean that you won. An analogy I've been using throughout this is that it would be like determining the outcome of the Super Bowl based on the halftime score. Just because you put some points on the board to begin with doesn't mean that you won. Now, the president has said that observers in Pennsylvania have to be 100 feet away from the ballots. That's not true. That's a made-up number. I think he is confusing that with the rule that demonstrators have to be at least 100 feet away from the polling place. And that is pretty standard. Electioneering is not allowed at polling places.
Sending things to us. I've never seen such love and such affection and such spirit as I've seen for this. People know what's happening, and they see what's happening, and it's before their eyes. And there are many instances which will be reported very shortly. There's tremendous litigation going on, and this is a case where they're trying to steal an election.
There is no evidence that anyone is trying to steal an election. What Democrats are arguing for is for every vote to be counted. It is not a radical proposition, and counting is not stealing. President Trump is suing to stop the count of legitimate ballots in areas where he is ahead, while he is also calling for continued counting, which should happen, in areas where he is behind.
They're going forward. They don't want anybody in there. They don't want anybody watching them as they count the ballots. And
they don't want anybody watching them as they count the ballots. I want to again highlight that in many of these swing districts, they live stream. They have 24/7 cameras showing you what's going on. We are streaming on Now This, many of those broadcasts. There is no dark back room where votes get taken away and people don't see them. It's simply not true.
Very far away, so far that people are using binoculars to try and see, and there's been tremendous problems caused. They put paper on all of the windows so you can't see in, and the people that are banned are very unhappy and become somewhat violent.
He is making things up, although it is true that there is in fact some There is in fact intimidation going on. Trump supporters surrounded polling places, or rather vote counting places in Detroit, in Arizona, and made the people working, the public servants working to count the ballots, feel that they were being threatened and that their lives were put at risk.
That's why they did the mail-in ballots, where there's tremendous corruption and fraud going on. That's why they mailed out tens of millions of unsolicited ballots without any verification measures whatsoever.
It is simply not true to say that there are not verification measures for mail-in ballots. Every state's rules are different, but they all have verification. Ballots were sent only to registered voters. In many cases, they were only sent to voters who requested them. Many states had barcodes on their ballots. There are signature verifications. And in Pennsylvania in particular, all mail ballots had to be requested. And the identity and addresses were reviewed and approved. And so the president's claims are simply false.
No idea. They're just taking numbers. They're writing down things, the workers, and doing a lot of bad things. And we have a lot of information coming in litigation that you'll see that will shake even you people up. And you've seen it all. The officials overseeing the counting in Pennsylvania and other key states are all part of a corrupt Democrat machine that you've written about. And for a long time, you've been writing about the corrupt Democrat machine. I went to school there, and I know a lot about it. It hasn't changed. It's a long time ago, and hasn't changed. It's gotten worse. In Pennsylvania, partisan Democrats have allowed ballots in the state to be received 3 days after the election. And we think much more than that. And they're counting those with
Yes, but they still had to be postmarked by the election date.
whatsoever. So you don't have postmarks, you don't have identification.
That is not true.
There have been a number of disturbing irregularities across the nation. Our campaign has been denied access to observe any counting in Detroit. Detroit is another place. And I wouldn't say it has the best reputation for election integrity. Poll workers in Michigan were duplicating ballots, but when our observers attempted to challenge the activity, those poll workers jumped in front of the volunteers to block their view so that they couldn't see what they were doing.
There is absolutely no evidence that anyone was duplicating ballots. And a duplicated ballot wouldn't work because they are all have an address and a name on them. Even if there were two ballots from the same person, only one could be counted.
Observers who were legal observers that were supposed to be there. In Detroit, there were hours of unexplained delay in delivering many of the votes for counting. The final batch did not arrive until 4 in the morning. And even though the polls closed at 8 o'clock, so they brought it in, and the batches came in, and nobody knew where they came from. We've also been denied access to observe in critical places.
This is simply not true. The president keeps saying nobody knows where things come from. The president often likes to suggest that if he doesn't know something, nobody knows it. He talks about countries that nobody's ever heard of. He talks about members of Congress that nobody's ever heard of. These votes aren't coming from places where nobody knows where they came from. They're coming from U.S. citizens. And again, they all are verified against a voter registry.
Because they talk about votes, and I think they should use the word legal votes. We want every legal vote counted, and I want every legal vote counted. We want openness and transparency, no secret count rooms, no mystery ballots, no illegal votes.
There are no secret count rooms. There are no mystery ballots. Official election observers have not been turned away from any polling place. It is typical for campaigns to have official election observers, and they have not been turned away. In Michigan, where the Trump campaign is making these claims, a judge asked a campaign lawyer for evidence that any of these things had happened, and they were unable to provide it.
Very easily, we think there's going to be a lot of litigation because we have so much evidence, so much proof.
And the claim of votes being brought in to a Detroit polling place at 4 a.m., this seems to be a story that has been debunked. People were sharing images of a box being carried into a polling place, but there is video evidence that the box was camera equipment, not votes.
Very easy to handle elections were disastrous. This is a large-scale version, and it's getting worse and worse every day. We're hearing stories that are horror stories, absolute horror stories, and we can't let that happen to the United States of America. It's not a question of who wins, Republican, Democrat, Joe, myself. We can't let that happen to our country. We can't be disgraced by having something like this happen. So it will be hopefully cleared up, maybe soon, I hope soon, but it'll probably go through a process, a legal process, and as you know, I've claimed certain states, and he's claiming states, and we can both claim the states, but ultimately I have a feeling judges are going to have to rule. But there's been a lot of shenanigans, and we can't stand for that in our country. Thank you very much.
There have been no evidence of shenanigans. So that is what the President of the United States had to say tonight. He made a lot of blatantly false claims. I was able to provide you the correct information on many of them, but they came so fast and were so baseless that we were not able to get to all of them. But I do just want to tell you just a few things about voter fraud. A comprehensive Loyola Law School study found only in the 2018 midterm election that actually led to a revote. That is the most substantial instance of voter fraud in recent history. The Brennan Center for Justice in 2017 ranked the risk of ballot fraud at roughly 0.00004%. There is no evidence that mail-in voting is any more subject to fraud than in-person voting. In fact, there is great reason to think that it is more secure because the ballots are have more scrutiny applied to them because each one has to be hand tallied by an election official. And in many states, there are different specific guidelines, but there are generally barcodes, signature verification. Mail-in ballots are actually discarded, not because of fraud, on technicalities, at a substantially high rate because they are so much. So the president claims that he won multiple states. He has won some states, but he has not won Pennsylvania. He has not won Michigan, as he claimed. His lead in Georgia right now is down to fewer than 4,000 votes, and the votes that remain to be counted are coming from areas like Fulton County, which tends to have a lot of Democratic voters. As I highlighted at the beginning, there is nothing suspicious about the fact that one candidate may take a lead at the beginning of the night, and then as more votes are counted, the other candidate can catch up. It tends to be the case that Republicans take an early lead, and then Democrats catch up. This happens in normal years simply because Republicans tend to live in more sparsely populated districts that therefore can be counted more quickly because there are fewer votes to count, and Democrats, city dwellers, tend to live in densely populated districts where there are more votes to count. So the fact that Republican votes get counted more quickly and then Democrats catch up, even in a normal year, is not suspicious. But in a year when over 100 million people voted early, and Democrats were far more likely to vote by mail than Republicans, and mail-in votes in most states were not allowed to be open, take a socially distanced method of voting, that person's vote should count less. And when the president says it is suspicious that he is behind in Democrat-run areas, Democrat-run just means that more people who vote blue live in those areas. So it's not surprising that more people who live in those areas vote blue. The president keeps describing the process working the way it does and always works as suspicious, and it's not. I want to repeat and reiterate some of these things I just said because they are so important, and also I think our stream might have frozen for a moment. Nothing is surprising about a candidate who has an early lead losing that lead as more votes are counted. And it is particularly not surprising for a Republican to take an early lead and for that lead to shrink. Now, that is not to say that Joe Biden will necessarily win in the end. Donald Trump still has some paths to victory. Joe Biden has more paths to victory at the moment. Really, Trump needs to win every uncalled state in order to win the electoral victory. But that is possible. And no one is saying that, no one on the Democratic side is saying that votes should only be counted that will help Joe Biden. Donald Trump is specifically saying he wants to stop the counting in areas where he is currently ahead, and he wants to continue the counting in areas where he is behind in hopes of catching up. I used the analogy earlier that this is like trying to end the Super Bowl game at halftime and say that it's suspicious if touchdowns are scored in the second half. Someone tweeted at me that this compared this to a poker game, and I said, yes, this is like somebody trying to say, we're going to stop the turn and the river from happening because I like the hand that I have just based on the flop. The ironic thing, though, is that if all vote counting were stopped right now, Joe Biden could be declared the winner because he is substantially ahead in every respect, in the popular vote and in the electoral vote. He may not be ahead in the end. We don't know who is going to win this election. It is too close to call, and anyone telling you that this election has been decided is not telling you the truth. And the President of the United States tells you that he has won this election, that he has won Pennsylvania, that he has won Michigan. None of those statements are true. Every vote should be counted. This country is all about everyone's vote being counted. No one's vote counts more or less than anyone else's. So that's what I have to say. That's what you need to know. Hang in there, folks. We don't know how this will end. We don't know when this will end. But every vote must be counted. It's also important to note that when every vote is counted and the election is called for one candidate or the other, the losing candidate does have a legal and legitimate opportunity to demand a recount in areas where the vote was very close. So you should be prepared for that. It may take a long time to decide this election. Those of you who are old enough to remember the election of 2000 will know that that election was decided on December 12th. So hang in there. We are going to get through this together. Do not be discouraged by the process. Do not be suspicious of the process playing out in public, in plain sight. I can't emphasize this enough. You can see the votes being tallied in most of these places where the president is claiming that it's happening in a back room with paper up over the windows. They're streaming it. We're carrying it on Now This. I think we've got some live streams you can go check out now, and you can see literally what democracy looks like. That's what I have to say for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. Please stay safe. We are still in a pandemic. The President of the United States said no one would be talking about COVID-19 after November 4th, and as I just highlighted, we have lost nearly 2,000 Americans to it in the last 24 hours alone. So continue to social distance, continue to wear a mask, continue to take care of yourself and your family. Don't take for granted the people that you love. Let them know that you love them. We are going to get through this together as a nation. Now This will do our best to give you the best, most helpful information. For Now This, I have the support tonight from Brandon Caruso, Sarah Kotis, Ian McKenna, Matt McDonough, Nico Pitney, Alex Rubinowitz, Versha Sharma, and Shelby Backlund. I am Alan Piper. Thank you, be safe, and have a good night.